and activism around these issues. I really appreciate being in all of your company, and I'm super excited to discuss some of the ideas here. Is speaking at this volume cool? Sound good? Okay. Feel free to jump in with questions as we're going through some of the content. And so what I am working on now is really an effort to speak to a lot of other, there's a lot of literature unfolding right now around veganism. And so if people want citations later, I'm happy to provide those additional reading materials. But a lot of these ideas really build on not just what's happening in activist spaces, but also in academic spaces, and trying to speak across, kind of synthesize a lot of what I'm seeing. So a bit about me. I'm originally from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So Wisconsin is known for cheese. Oh my gosh. I adore cheese. I have a love affair with cheese. And I think it's partially growing up there. When I was 9, I became vegetarian. And cheese was kind of this, it was the thing you cling to when you're vegetarian, I think. And also, I spend a lot of time thinking my vegetarianism was really a personal choice, really an individual level kind of thing, feeling uncomfortable talking about it, like I had to kind of keep it on the down low. I then went to school at Boston University. I got interested in principles of sovereignty. I have my degrees in political science and with a specialization in Latin American policy and international relations. My bachelor's and master's from Boston University. And then I went to, I think I was kind of like, I give up on this country. We just invaded Iraq, and was very deeply upset about kind of the imperialism. And I was like, okay, I'm going as far away, and ended up in Argentina, which Argentina is known for. And so I was there for a long time. And again, I was there for about 5 years and met 0 vegans and vegetarians there. And I worked in community development. And so many people were, what? Vegetarian? Wait, you're the first one. Like, I've heard of that. I've heard of Lisa Simpson. I've heard of, these pop culture representations. And there were some other volunteers from other countries who were vegan and vegetarian, but Argentines, not so much. I decided I wanted to go back to grad school and went to Penn State, their rural sociology program. I was really into the food sovereignty. Folks aware of Via Campesina, that umbrella kind of social movements organization. So Via Campesina is a kind of an umbrella organization that brings together a lot of smaller organizations. And food sovereignty is, have you heard of food security? Right. So food security is kind of like you have enough calories. That's it. It's like a number, quantitative, how much you got. Food justice is what we tend to talk about in the United States, and that is linked to some justice and kind of liberatory currents. Food sovereignty emphasizes the right to food that's also culturally appropriate. Via Campesina also advocates for land ownership, and also has a very strong kind of anti-structures, power impression stance on a lot of these things. So they do a lot of mobilizations. And so I was very interested in that. Went back to Penn State, and I will admit, I was fascinated by the asado, right? The barbecue tradition in Argentina. I heard beef was getting more expensive, and I felt like that was unfair. I wanted everyone to be able to eat beef, even though I was a vegetarian. Talk about holding contradictions. I proposed doing that for my research, and then went down to Argentina. Been there and then gone to Penn State, went back to Argentina to collect data, and kind of ran into this something feels off, collecting data and advocating for more beef consumption. And I was like, oh, I wonder if there are, what's the opposite? I wonder if there are vegans and vegetarians around. And just was like, oh, there are some. I'll interview them and kind of figure out how did this happen here. But my own identity around vegetarianism and veganism was very underdeveloped, I would say, at that point. It was kind of like, well, it's my individual level thing, I just don't eat it. It's just about what I eat or don't eat. And it's in the process of doing research that's really changed. So to set things up for today, I want to talk about kind of 3 frameworks and for understanding veganism and plant-based diets in society. And to speak to your point about the prevalence of veganism, as a demographer, as my PhD in demography and sociology, I think we should be very optimistic about how rapidly it's happening, even if we can't count it very well. Because our nationally represented data sets do not have good questions on veganism and vegetarianism. It's been very hard to get them on there. Things like NHANES, the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey, all of these big data sets that academics say, well, this is the true prevalence, right, are problematic because they don't have great questions, and they also, the sampling strategies are, don't understand that we have, also I think, we understand that there are geographic concentrations. So we're not doing a great job of measuring that. And I think, and maybe your work would speak to also the ways that big data can help us maybe measure this even better. But okay, so we're seeing this rapid growth. And one of the frameworks is kind of the all about the animals, single issue veganism, right? That's one current and kind of framework. The second one we'll talk about is the personal choice framework. I'm doing it for this reason or this reason, it's my personal choice. And the alternative I'd like us to discuss today is really understanding veganism as an orienting philosophy to help us eat for liberation, and understanding when we say that, what does that mean? And this, I think, having this response to, have folks read or heard of Bell Hooks' work? Kind of. So Bell Hooks coined the imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist patriarchy, talks about that. And I think we can add on the anthropocentric, imperialist, white supremacist, patriarchal capitalism. So that's kind of like, so as a sociologist, when we say, what's wrong with society, I like to say, well, the anthropocentric, imperialist, white supremacist, patriarchal capitalist system we live in, which is a huge mouthful. But I think it really grabs everything nicely. It helps us understand how social structures are connected with each other. And there's lots of great work conceptualizing the four pieces: imperialism, white supremacy, patriarchy, and capitalism. And then I think that fifth piece we're still working on. And I think anthropocentrism is a good term for linking and having those five kind of pieces to the structure.
What about adding like cis heterosexism? Like, or like
yeah.
Those pieces.
Cis hetero patriarchy. We should really have
yeah.
that. We should definitely have the cis hetero. And I took some of this out. I gave a talk similar down in Salem, and I think, the familiarity with some of this reading makes us more comfortable with the language of saying quickly, like, imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist. Like, the first time you hear it, you're like, whoa, that's so much. But I think we do need to have the cis hetero patriarchal piece in there. Thank you. So another useful tool to keep in mind is understanding what is social change. So can I ask a question like, what would someone, toss out some words or expressions of when someone says, hey, what's social change? What do you say?
System.
Okay. A system.
Majority shift.
Okay.
Is it individuals using voice?
Okay. Yeah.
What do you mean by social change versus individual change? Because I mean, if you look at Margaret Mead's stuff, she said that the world's changed by people, individuals making change.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, and she's more of an anthropologist, right? I think right, disciplines are to some extent just these boxes we put around certain ideas. They're not, I don't think they're particularly helpful, actually. I think they can be harmful. But I do think the framework of social change, understanding it, like if you imagine almost like a spider web of all these structures around us that we named, the white supremacy, the patriarchy, these things connect us. And so individual change definitely drives what the network looks like. But the network is also more than the sum of its parts, right? Our society is more than just our individual level actions. In coming together, two people, we each have our individual level piece, and then there's something created by interacting. And I think that understanding social change then is a shaking up of that system. Well, actually, I think there are two types of social change. There's this kind of social change that tightens those linkages. So when we talk about social change like that, I like to call that retrogressive social change. So social change that really just hardens all of the structures, the stuff we're seeing today, especially at national level politics, that's what that's doing. And then we also have a liberatory current of social change in society, right? Something that loosens up these ties that we're connected to and allows us to kind of have greater freedoms as individuals, reform networks in different spaces, and really just have more space in society. Another useful brief concept, but I think the reasons how we can conceptualize knowledge production taking place in this way is really from understanding, folks read about like epistemologies and how we produce knowledge, how we understand what is known, what we believe. I think especially Black feminist and sociological kind of feminist writers have influenced my thinking on this, and they really just encourage us to understand that knowledge is about making connections. It's about how we can learn to see patterns across things that may look separate. And understanding that this compartmentalization of the natural world, of the social world, is really part of the white male capitalist framework of thinking. So an epistemology of connections is...
I need to make another comment, and that is, most boys and girls grow up with their mothers and their teachers in grade school and high school and even increasingly college or women. And so I guess I find it hard for a boy or a girl to all of a sudden turn to be 18 years old and all the boys were saying, well, we're now part of the patriarchy, and the girls were saying, well, now we're part of the anti-patriarchy. So I think we have to look at the positive values of patriarchy and the positive values of matriarchy and continue to build on both of those. And I'm seeing those positive changes occur because women are more in the workplace now.
So
but just to
yeah,
say that, yeah.
I think that the way that you're framing a lot of this, though, is really indicative of the problem of the binary way of thinking about gender, right? And so when we're talking about patriarchy being an oppressive structure, I don't think there are no positives to patriarchy. There is nothing positive about a system that oppresses people, and it's not just oppressing women, it's oppressing men as well, because we're trapped in a system. And separating, let's conceptually separate patriarchy from masculinity, so perhaps that could be helpful there. And also understanding that by shaking up the patriarchy, the cis-hetero patriarchy really, we're really, even in our language, need to be talking about things as children rather than boys and girls, people rather than women and men, or women, men, and gender nonconforming folks. So I think those things are, but I hear your concerns, and I think it's just very important for us to remember that these structures are deeply oppressive.
Well, considering the way that you have defined patriarchy, I would agree with you 100%.
Great, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So speaking then about this, I think it's nice that we're bringing up patriarchy, because the first framework, what we see a lot happening today is it's all about the animals. Right? Or the t-shirts, I like animals more than people. Right? There's some of that. So I call this the single issue, right? The single issue veganism. And it really presents veganism as this morally superior ethical response to non-human animal exploitation. It's kind of the reaction to speciesism. And it also sets up, in many ways, animals in need of our saving. We kind of have to be the saviors of animals. So it kind of goes in that direction. And I think I'll just tell one of the stories. When I was collecting data down in Argentina, I interviewed, it's a pseudonym, Christian, we'll call him, a white man, vegan. And at the time, right, I was vegetarian. And I was asking him, well, would you date a meat eater? Yes. be more fun. You get to see her change her diet.
Wow.
And then he goes, well, what about you? Are you vegan? And I said, oh, I'm vegetarian. I give you 2 months. Take Earthlings, watch Earthlings, and you'll be vegan. And I was like, fuck this. That's to be frank. And I think I say fuck this intentionally because there's a lot of women out there who are saying fuck the patriarchy, because that's essentially what I was reacting to, right? As a woman being told this is the one way to be, this is what's happening, this is what's going on. I almost, it lasted for years where I didn't want to be vegan and just to spite him, right? So I think this reveals the risk of single issue veganism, right? It reveals the fact that if we are emphasizing it's all about the animals and this is the one way to be ethical, we can deeply alienate folks. I felt the sense of alienation, and I think a lot of, this happens a lot around race also as well in the United States. And so I think this framework also tends to emphasize vegan as a noun. It's an identity that is, this is what it looks like to be vegan. A person is vegan. So there's our kind of one problematic framework. And then our second one, how many of you have heard of the Impossible Burger? Probably most, right? So I think that is a nice piece to touch on in our brains. When we think of what is veganism, the second framework really takes veganism and says, okay, well, it's a plant-based diet. And it's a matter of personal choice, and there are these different reasons. It's the health reason, there's the environmental reason, there's the animal rights reason, there's a taste reason. Sometimes even people have more specific reasons. And it kind of makes this compartmentalized list of, well, you could be this, or you could do it for this reason, or this reason, or this reason.
And maybe not everybody here knows about the moral dilemma of the Impossible Burgers, but I thought that might help to talk about. It's about the animal testing.
Yeah. So exactly, this framework of plant-based fails to consider veganism as a worldview entirely, right? It just kind of brushes aside this idea of a philosophy of veganism. So we're missing this power. We're left with vegan almost as this like kind of weak adjective, descriptor of, well, this is a vegan thing, and oftentimes these things are deeply embedded in the capitalistic power structures. And the Impossible Burger, in addition to the ethical concerns of animal testing, I mean, the way it's being sold, the Time magazine article that I also saw with the interview, is kind of this, again, white male savior who's very wealthy, who has high technology, and he will single-handedly kind of transform the world with this magical plant-based solution. And so we're really missing something here when we think of veganism from this list perspective, and when we treat plant-based foods as commodities and rely on high-tech solutions. Because doing that is just going to perpetuate and can potentially even strengthen the power of corporations, right? And when you talk about corporate power, that's one of the most dangerous things strengthening in society today. It's tightening those webs, right? We're getting a strengthening of capitalism, unfortunately. And it also fails to consider the human suffering of that capitalistic system and of the kind of white supremacist system that it's connected to, right? Capitalism is deeply linked to white supremacy and patriarchy and imperialism, right? We can see these linkages. And, right, so the personal, individual choice stuff, I understand people's desire to read and all of the incredible nutrition literature coming out. We want to understand these things and how these processes unfold. I am, though, concerned that if we just are making like list after list, you know, we can flat out say there's a preponderance of scientific evidence that it is healthier, period. Preponderance. That's how, you know, when we talk about ideas shifting, people were saying that for a long time about climate change. We're finally getting to the point where I think people are like, yes, climate change is happening, right? There is a preponderance of scientific evidence.
Mm-hmm.
And we've had that for plant-based diets and veganism and vegetarianism for some time. And there's a lot of reasons why that's not popularized, right? Who's funding research, all of those things. But so we have those two frameworks, and kind of, so vegan as a noun or vegan as an adjective. And what I wanted to talk, or kind of leave us with, is this notion of, well, how about veganism and veganism as an orienting philosophy towards how we orient ourselves towards the world. And
What do you mean by philosophy?
Mhm.
as a philosophy, it's a worldview, it's a framework, it's tapping into a set of principles and beliefs that are connected with liberatory social change.
Okay.
So, and I also think from this perspective, we can take vegan and let vegan be an adverb. So, I'll come back to that in 1 second.
Mhm.
But so this philosophy, AFCO and Silco, have folks read their work? So they have the set of essays, two sisters writing on veganism. They do an excellent job of kind of theorizing vegan as a philosophy. I would recommend reading their book.
How do you spell their name?
So APHRO - ism is the title of the book.
What's the title?
Afroism. Yeah.
Okay.
So this, and some of the pieces that come out of there, for example, are just the framework of understanding that what has it meant to be human over time. If we go back in 500 years, we very clearly understand human was white,
Mhm.
human was really male, full human, participating in society, and human was also wealthy, right? So this, but especially white and male, and so human then, and they call into question the ways that our language around animals and humans in the vegan spaces, they do an excellent job of the critique of the single issue veganism as well. So I think that that's part of how veganism becomes an orienting philosophy. I think also understanding veganism is kind of a current, almost rather than a list, we can think of it like an umbrella. We're all joining in and we all have our different pieces, but we are still deeply connected. And when we think about it in this deeply connected way, right now I think we see a lot of policing of veganism, right? Within the vegan community, within people who are vegan and vegetarian, and also by people who eat a lot of meat. There's a constant policing of, oh, you're vegan? Oh, so you don't eat leather, you don't eat honey, you can't have that, you can't do that. Right? And it's exhausting to be policed. And when we start to question that tactic of policing, right, it's exhausting to be policed in our identities. It's exhausting to live in a police state, a carceral state, right? We can see that these connections, these things are related. Policing veganism is also how we police our society, literally the institution of the police, and also like mass incarceration. So when we let go of the policing and we kind of like, well, this is an orienting philosophy. This is about a principle of reducing harm to all beings. Then we say, okay, well, I can be the prison system, right? How do we be compassionate towards people who feel like eating meat? I mean, I think we understand that the animal liberation framework, to make it more powerful, we have to link it with other liberatory frameworks, and like prison abolitionism as a framework. So the same way there's an animal rights kind of wanting to end the incarceration of animals, we need to understand that we need to also be talking about ending the incarceration of people. And these things are deeply connected. And the more that we can see those connections, I think we can understand then that we're all sitting here today, and I'm making the assumption everyone's a U.S. person living in the U.S., and our government is enacting violence around the world, and it has always been doing that, right? We are in some way complicit in that. And even if, as individuals, we can't change everything, and that's okay. So some folks, may not feel that it's possible to change their diets right now or on the scale of making that jump to the policed vegan identity or policed kind of vegetarian identity either. So instead, if we posit veganism as an adverb, I think we open up a lot of space for vegan to become mainstream. And mainstream in the widely shared sense. So let's eat vegan. So embrace all of the eat vegan 5 days a week. Cool. Eat vegan 1 day a week. The Meatless Mondays campaign, they've used the language of don't eat meat on Mondays. I think it is be vegan on Mondays. Like, let's be stronger and say, like, this is a philosophy we're trying to directly align ourselves with on Mondays and maybe Tuesdays, increasingly, right? More and more. And I think when we do this, it also opens up space for those questions, those policing questions. If we can really bring in compassion, and we're asked, well, well, you don't use leather. No, I don't. Do you use leather? Don't make the assumption that other people use leather. Ask. That question is destabilizing, right? Because the assumption right now is that everybody is eating meat. So instead of, in a new space is, oh, do you eat meat? Right? We can ask questions that provoke new conversations. Oh, why? How come? Why do you do it? And I think that I've engaged in a lot of conversations with meat eaters, and I think it's, although probably a lot of you guys have done even more activism work, mine's more been like a sociological kind of understanding connections to meat, particularly in Argentina. And understanding that for many people, meat and cheese, including myself, cheese, is deeply tied to our memories. I mean, it is a part of how we don't just eat for calories, right? We eat because food represents culture and connection, and it's hard for us to understand that parts of our culture are really sick.
Mm-hmm.
The U.S. culture, the U.S. practice of consuming industrial meat and dairy the way we do is incredibly sick. But it's still hard for me to say I don't want chocolate milk because I have so fond memories of drinking chocolate milk and white milk, and I drink like a gallon of milk a day, every 2 or 3 days in college. I was drinking so much milk, and it wasn't until I went to Argentina and there was just this, I had to replace it simultaneously with, oh, there's pus in it. That wasn't enough to tell me, oh, there's disgusting crap in your milk. It just wasn't enough. It wasn't until I finally found, like, and this is where we have to, I think, be compassionate towards ourselves, like the Silk or one of those, like these cashew milk things that are super processed and capitalistic and problematic, but I need that as a crutch sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's okay. So the last point I think I'd like to make is I thought this framework is timely because, Donald's saying things every day. And Donald recently said, talking about immigration, you wouldn't believe how bad these people are. These aren't people, these are animals, and we're taking them out of the country at a level and a rate that's never happened before. If we have veganism as an orienting philosophy, we can understand this. So here, people would say, oh, he's dehumanizing people, he's comparing them to animals. If we understand veganism as an orienting philosophy, we see, yeah, he's doing that, and he's simultaneously enacting like this white supremacist, patriarchal way of thinking. He's really deepening all of those power structures. And then we can step back and say, start to question, if we understand imperialism as part of the root cause, why do we even have borders, right? Understanding that borders are also unethical because borders are wrapped up in this deep root problem. And I think veganism